The stars above the Lara Prime sparkled like distant diamonds, cold and indifferent, as high-speaker Azarin stared out from the crystal-paneled tower of the Sky Hall. Her blue, scaled hands trembled slightly as she clutched the datapad containing the last incoming report. 47 more colony worlds lost in less than 2 months. Millions gone, their signals extinguished in silence. The Kirac swarm was unlike anything that the Lyri Confederation had ever known. Relentless, unreasoning, and utterly immune to diplomacy. Born as scholars, artists, and peaceful builders, the Thalari had never needed war, relying instead on treaties and technology to protect their worlds. But the swarm wasn't something that could be reasoned with. It was a tide that consumed everything, leaving behind hollowed planets and static-choked echoes. Suring paced the grand chamber as the council murmured around her, voices filled with fear. "We must send another signal," one counselor said, "to the core worlds. Maybe they'll help." But the core had already refused. "Your sector is too remote," they had said, "and the risk is too high." The Thalari were alone. Siren swallowed hard and looked at the ancient beacon console, sealed for centuries, its smooth surface coated with dust. Legends spoke of an ancient race humans who once roamed the stars. They were powerful, dangerous, unpredictable, and then, just over 200 cycles ago, they vanished. Some said they destroyed themselves in wars, too terrible to imagine. Others whispered that they had gone silent by choice, turning inward, becoming ghosts among the stars. No one knew the truth, but Siren did no one think if the swarm continued unchecked, the Thalari would vanish next. With trembling fingers, she activated the beacon. The interface responded with a deep hum, lights blinking for the first time in generations. Kada spoke the old words, "To the lost children of Earth, we ask for help, not as allies, but as those who face extinction." The signal burst out into space, repeating in hundreds of languages, carried by waves of energy that rippled far beyond the reach of the Thalari's known space. Then, nothing. Hours passed. Days, as Siren stopped sleeping. The council called her desperate, mad. "They won't answer. They're gone," they said. But she watched the stars each night, waiting, hoping. Then, on the 9th day, a new signal arrived. It didn't come through regular channels. It didn't even have a source. They just found it, suddenly, in every system, every terminal, burning across every screen in red and black. Transmission acknowledged. "Earth has heard you." The message was followed by silence, but it was not the silence of denial. It felt like the silence before a storm. Then hours, long-range sensors picked up distortions at the edge of the sector. Not shipped, something bigger. A fleet was coming, but the readings were wrong. The mass signatures were enormous, more than 10 times the size of any known battleship. The Thalari scrambled to get visual confirmation, and what they saw made their blood run cold. Monstrous vessels, black as the void, shaped not for elegance, but for war. Their hulls were jagged, scarred, and pulsing with light from deep within. Some were shaped like massive hammers, others like giant wings of steel. They moved in complete silence, forming a wall of fire and metal. No diplomatic tags, no broadcasts, no greetings. It's only a new message, short and final. "Help has arrived. Stay out of our way." Panic spread across the Thalari core worlds. Who were these beings? Were they the ancient humans, or something worse? Azarin stood alone at the observatory as the first ship entered. Opida, massive dreadnought that blocked the sun for over 3 minutes as it passed. Its name flashed briefly across the display. Tian's Goliath. Then the stars shifted again. The swarm had arrived. Hundreds of Kirac bioships emerged from subspace just beyond the Thalari system's outer rim. They moved like insects, twitching, blinking with organic heat, each one bristling with weapons grown from their own bodies. The Thalari defense grid was already failing before the first volley. Screams echoed across the council chambers. Evacuation orders were issued, but then something incredible happened. The human fleet moved, and when it did, the universe seemed to shudder. With perfect precision, without hesitation, Earth's monster fleet charged. Red flares from their engines lit the void as the humans opened fire. The Thalari had never seen weapons like these swarms of micromissiles, railgun blasts the size of rivers, energy lances that split ships in half. Where the swarm flowed like a plague, the human fleet struck like wrath itself. The battle lasted only 23 minutes. When it was over, every single Kirak bioship had been reduced to debris. Not one human ship was lost. Iciarian watched from orbit, stunned. She didn't understand how they had fought so flawlessly, how they had anticipated every move of the swarm. She requested a meeting with the human fleet commander, and, after some delay, was granted access to the Goliath. A cold, metallic shuttle picked her up and delivered her inside. The ship was unlike anything she had seen, brutalist in design, humming with power. Humans moved with silent focus, armored, armed, their eyes hard and distant. Admiral Jane Kovacs greeted her briefly, her voice low and calm. "This isn't about your people," she said. "This is unfinished business." Ezrin didn't understand. "You answered our call," she said. "You saved our world." Kovacs stared at her for a moment, then turned to a screen showing an ancient Earth news broadcast. Dated 2174 mentions of Earth cities burning, overrun by the Kirak during a forgotten invasion. "We're not saviors," she said quietly. "We're survivors, and now we're the reckoning." As the Goliath turned toward the next system toward more Kirak hives, Ezrin realized that humanity hadn't come back to join the galaxy. They had come to burn something out of it. The Kirak hive cluster loomed ahead like a living storm, a churning mass of organic warships that pulsed and hissed through the void, glowing with bioluminescent veins and moving like predators around. A bleeding wound in space, but a Terran fleet did not slow as it approached. Instead, it accelerated. Admiral Jane Kovacs stood on the bridge of the TNS Goliath, eyes locked on the tactical map as her officers confirmed attack vectors. Around her, the command crew moved with silent precision, hands flying across dark hollow panels, their faces calm but focused, trained by decades of war and hardened by the kind of losses that only humanity seemed to survive. The Thalari observers aboard, including diplomat Ezrin, could only watch in stunned disbelief as the fleet formed into a crescent formation, with the Goliath at its center, flanked by twin dreadnoughts, Ravager and Titan's Wake, each larger. In the cities, they protected no warning shots, no final demands, just the sudden fury of war as the human ships opened fire. The first volley from the Terran fleet was more like a tidal wave than a missile strike. Relegans fired metal slugs at a fraction of light speed, turning to Kirak command ships into glowing dust in under 3 seconds, while swarms of microdrones spilled from human carriers and tore into the bioships' soft underbellies, carving tunnels through living armor and leaving trails of boiling ichor in their wake. Explosions bloomed like fiery roses across the void, and the hive cluster roared. In response, launching organic torpedoes and parasitic boarding pods toward the humans. But nothing reached the Goliath's point defense systems, shredded everything within 50 kilometers, filling the space around it with spinning metal debris and shattered limbs. Ezrin turned to an officer and whispered, "How do they fight like this?" But the man didn't answer, just nodded once and went back to coordinating the next strike. Kovacs gave no speeches, no rallying words. She simply raised her hand and gestured. And another wave of annihilation followed, this time targeting the hive's central brain ships, which erupted into screaming psychic pulses as they died, shaking nearby the Thalari watchers. to their knees. The Kirak began to scatter, their swarm tactics crumbling under the pressure of human strategy. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most feared predators turned to flee. But Earth's fleet was faster. Fighters launched from the carrier Black Star raced ahead, weaving between the twisting carcasses of dead ships, firing plasma bursts and EMPs that crippled the runners before they could escape. The Goliath moved forward like a fortress on wings, its hull blackened but unbroken, absorbing every hit the swarm had managed to land. Its eye calculating thousands of variables per second, adapting, evolving, improving with every enemy move. Then came the final order. Kovacs stepped forward and spoke only 2 words: burn it. The fusion lances activated, beams of light so bright they split the darkness in half, cutting through the final hive like a scalpel through soft tissue. The explosion that followed lit up the sector, visible from Teleri ground stations as a new star in the sky. Silence followed, heavy and cold. The battlefield was a graveyard now, filled with burning wreckage, drifting bodies, and the slow tumbling of what remained of the Kirak. On board the Goliath, Azerin stood, shaking, struggling to understand the scale of what she had witnessed. "You saved us," she said to Kovacs, voice barely more than a whisper. The Admiral turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "No," she said. "This wasn't for you." Azerin blinked. "Then why?" Kovacs walked to a display screen showing old Earth footage burning forests, shattered cities, families buried in rubble. "They hit Earth 200 years ago. We lost billions. They didn't just attack us, okay? We woke something up in us, something we tried to forget." The screen changed again, okay? This time showing ancient human war machines marching across battlefields, machines now dwarfed by the monsters in orbit. "We didn't come back to make peace. We came back to finish something." Saren stared at the woman, now more a symbol than a soldier, and understood. Earth hadn't just survived in hiding, it had evolved into a force shaped by vengeance and forged by pain. And now it had a target. Back on the Teleri capital, news of the victory caused cheers and celebrations, but some leaders were uneasy. "They fight like they were born for it," one counselor said. "They act without hesitation, without question." Another replied, "Is that not what we needed?" But the first shook his head. "Maybe, but what if one day that fire burns us too?" Meanwhile, the Terran fleet moved on, charting courses deeper into uncharted space toward the Kirak. Home systems, toward the heart of the hive, where the queen still slept beneath the surface of a moon, long thought dead. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait. They simply moved like a hammer falling, driven by ghosts and memory, unstoppable, unyielding. The galaxy, once comfortable in its peaceful balance, had felt the weight of Earth's return. And now, all sentient eyes turned to the dark, where the humans had vanished once again, chasing something only they seemed to understand: justice, or vengeance, or perhaps just a long, cold satisfaction of knowing that this time they would be the monsters no one dared awaken. The stars were quiet above the scorched remains of Vega 4, a once starving Terran outpost, now reduced to blackened soil and drifting ash. Its cities turned to craters, and its defenses left in ruins, and the only sound that filled the air was the static of broken communications and the low hum of ships scanning for survivors. Lieutenant Miguel Rojas stood in silence on the observation deck of the TNS, resolute eyes locked on the wreckage below. His mind heavy with questions he could not ask aloud, not here, not in front of the others who moved with machine-like discipline, all wearing the same cold look of acceptance, the same expressionless faces of soldiers who had seen too much and still chose to march forward. The Kirak had struck fast, using a hidden slip-space tunnel to bypass Earth's forward fleet and attack from behind. A move so bold and unexpected that it caught the humans off guard for the first time since the war began, and Vega 4 paid the price. For 12,000 soldiers and colonists were gone in minutes, swallowed by fire and poisoned air, and the emergency distress signal had reached the fleet too late to save anyone. Admiral Kovacs stood at the center of the war table on the Goliath, silent as her commanders reported the loss in clipped, emotionless terms, numbers, coordinates, damage percentages, none of which could truly describe what had happened on the ground. Miguel had seen the reports, but it wasn't until he stood in orbit above the dead world that the truth hit him. They were not invincible, and for the first time, doubt began to creep in. He returned to his quarters that night, unable to sleep, and replayed old training footage from the academy lectures about honor, strategy, duty, and wondered if any of it still mattered when your enemy didn't care about any of those things. He remembered something his grandfather once said, a war veteran from Earth's past. Victory without restraint is not strength, it's madness in armor. Miguel didn't know if he believed it, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. On the bridge the next morning, orders were given for immediate retaliation. The Terran fleet would strike back harder than ever, burning out every trace of the swarm near Vega 4's region. There would be no pause, no negotiation. The words came from Kovacs herself. We will not be challenged. Not again. Thalari. Diplomat Azarin, still aboard the Goliath, requested a private meeting with the Admiral and expressed concern about the scale of Earth's response, gently suggesting restraint. Kovacs only stared at her for a long moment before answering. We are not here to rescue. We are here to end this. Azarin, shaken, began writing a detailed report to her council back home, warning that humanity's war was becoming something larger than just defensive, was becoming personal. Back on the Resolute, Miguel watched the fleet prepare for the counterstrike. Strome carriers opened their launch bays, missiles were loaded, fusion coils glowed brighter than stars, and still he felt hollow. His friend and fellow officer, Harlan, tried to reassure him. They hit us first, he said. We're just hitting back. But Miguel wasn't so sure anymore. How far do we go before we lose ourselves? He asked. Harlan didn't answer. The retaliation began the next day, and the assault was like a force of nature. Kirak hives were reduced to dust. Kara moons cracked open with seismic warheads, and psychic echoes of dying Kirak minds flooded human ships with strange static that made some crew members scream in their sleep. Miguel led a boarding mission onto a captured bioship, and what he saw inside haunted him. Rows of dead Kirak larvae, small and unformed, burned by plasma fires, their bodies still twitching. He didn't speak of it when he returned. He simply cleaned his rifle and sat in silence. Across the galaxy, the Thalari Confederation grew nervous. The scientists tried to study human tactics, but found themselves overwhelmed by the scale and brutality. Some Thalari leaders now whispered of cutting ties, fearing that Earth's war was no longer a war of survival, but one of vengeance. Siren argued to maintain the alliance, believing the Kirak were a threat no one else could defeat. Still, she could not deny the fear growing in her people's hearts. On the human side, morale remained high, but it was a strange, focused kind of morale, silent pride, not joy. The soldiers didn't cheer when they won. They didn't speak of victory. They only moved forward. Admiral Kovacs announced a full strike into the deepest known region of Kirak space, toward the Hive Nexus itself. We finished this now, she said, but Miguel felt something shift within himself. That night, he recorded a message for command, not critical, but questioning. Are we saving the galaxy, he asked, or reshaping it in our image? He never sent the message. The next day, the fleet picked up a strange signal Kirak in origin, but unlike any they had heard before. A single phrase repeated in psychic waves, Translated by the AI, the Queen remembers. Silence fell over the war room. For centuries, the Hive Queen had been a myth, a figure used to scare colonies into maintaining readiness. But now, it seemed she was real and awake. Kovacs ordered a core set for the Black Reach Nebula, the suspected origin of the signal. As the fleet prepared to move, Miguel stood at the viewing bay and watched the stars slide by. Around him, humans sharpened their weapons and minds, ready to deliver Earth's fury again. But inside, Miguel felt a growing storm of fear, not of the enemy, but of what his people were becoming. And as the Goliath turned toward the unknown, Miguel wondered if Earth's greatest cost would not be its dead, but the part of its soul left behind in every system it scorched. The Black Reach Nebula was a ghost cloud of swirling shadows and blue mist, a place where sensors failed and ships drifted without sound. And as the Terran fleet entered its edge, silence fell over every command deck like a curtain of ice. Even the hardened crew of the TNS Goliath moved with unusual caution, their voices low, their hands steady but tense, because somewhere deep in the swirling fog ahead, the Hive Queen was waiting. Admiral Kovacs stood at the center of the bridge, unmoving, eyes locked on the display that showed static and flickers of ghost signals and nothing clear, nothing certain. But still she moved forward, ordering the fleet to advance through the fog in diamond formation, weapons charged, shields active, and countermeasures on standby. Behind her, Azerin watched nervously, sensing the tension in every officer's voice, but unable to speak because the pressure in the air was growing thicker with every passing minute, as if something ancient was watching them from the dark. Deep within the nebula, strange things happened. Lights flickered inside sealed rooms, voices whispered over dead channels, and once a drone operator screamed before collapsing, claiming she'd heard a voice in her mind, not speaking in words, but in hunger. Then, from nowhere, the Queen's fleet appeared, not like the chaotic swarms of before, but in perfect silence and perfect order. Hundreds of massive bioships shaped like deep-sea creatures, glowing with purple veins and linked by long chains of energy, drifting in a spiral formation that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kovacs didn't flinch, locked targets, ready to fire. But before a single shot could be launched, the Queen's voice entered every human mind at once, not as pain, not as threat, but as curiosity, as a cold whisper that said, "Why do you burn? Why do you chase?" Every officer froze. Some cried out. Miguel Rojas felt the voice in his bones and nearly dropped his rifle, gripping the console as if it would keep him grounded. Kovacs, however, remained still and replied aloud, "Because you started this." Queen answered, "We hunted. To grow, you slaughter, to erase. Which of us is the monster?" A flash of doubt passed through the bridge, but orders were orders, and the Goliath opened fire. The battle exploded in the center of the nebula, bright colors lighting up the clouds. Terran railguns and fusion lances clashing with psychic blasts and living weapons, and within moments, ships on both sides were falling, burning, breaking. But the Queen did not retreat. She fought with precision, each move calculated, each sacrifice intentional, as if playing a game humanity did not fully understand. And slowly, she began to push them back. The Titan's wake was the first to fall, its engines ripped out by a serpent-shaped bioship, its crew lost to the void. Then the Resolute, where Miguel fought, was struck by a viral spore that disabled half its systems, forcing him to lead a desperate defense against boarding drones that hissed and bled acid. Inside the Goliath, Kovacs realized the Queen wasn't just fighting, she was testing them, watching them respond, learning their weaknesses. "She's stalling," she said, eyes narrowing. "It's planning something bigger." Then the second wave arrived. Dozens more ships emerged from hidden pockets in the nebula, forming a double envelopment around the Terran formation. Was a trap. Kovacs ordered an emergency retreat, but the exit points were already closing, sealed by the Queen's psionic field, a barrier of thought that even light couldn't pass through. Human ships began to break formation, retreating in separate paths. And that's when chaos truly began. Comes overloaded. Navigation failed, and in the middle of it all, the Queen's voice returned, whispering now, not to everyone, but to individuals. To Miguel, she said, "Why follow those who cannot see the end?" To Asuran, "They fear peace more than war." To Kovacs, "You are strong, but broken. What do you really want?" Kovacs ignored it, forced her fleet into tighter formation, and prepared for one last push. Target the Queen's ship. "We end this now." The Goliath turned, weapons spinning up, and launched a full strike toward the heart of the enemy. For a moment, it looked like it might work. Massive kinetic slugs and plasma beams tore through the Queen's escort ships, burning them to ash. But then, the Queen's vessel shifted. It didn't dodge. It changed. Its form unfolded like wings of glass and bone, revealing a core that pulsed with light and dark at once. And from it came a burst of pure thought, so powerful that several human ships simply shut down, their crews falling unconscious, their AI cores wiped clean. Kovacs clenched her fists. "Keep firing." But it was too late. The Queen had seen enough. She unleashed her final move, a wave of psychic energy so powerful it bent gravity and pulled the Goliath toward her, tearing metal from holes and scattering drones like leaves in wind. Miguel, barely holding his ground aboard the crippled Resolute, looked up through the observation window and saw the impossible, a rift opening behind the Queen's ship, a living wormhole, built not by machines, but by her own mind, swirling with color and time. She was leaving and taking the battle with her. Kovacs made one last call. "Target the rift. Don't let her escape." But the Queen spoke one last time, louder than before. "You follow warlike breath. You do not end threats. You become them." And then she vanished into the rift, her remaining ships following, pulling the broken Terran forces behind them like dust in a storm. When the lights faded and the nebula cleared, the battlefield was empty, only drifting wreckage and silent. Alarms remained. The Queen had escaped, but not in defeat. She had tested humanity, and now she understood them. Kovacs stood silently on her damaged bridge, eyes locked on the dead space where the rift had been. Asuran approached, quiet. "What do we do now?" she asked. The Admiral said nothing for a long time. Then finally she replied, "Now we find her, and finish what we started." But inside, something had changed. For the first time, Admiral Kovacs wasn't sure if they were still chasing Victoria, if they were already chasing something else, something darker. Gil stared out from the broken decks of the Resolute, watching stars fade behind the fog, and wondered if this was the moment humanity stopped being heroes, became something else entirely. The Terran fleet floated in silence above the scarred edge of the Black Reach Nebula, its ships damaged and scattered, its crews quiet and shaken. For the Hive Queen had not just escaped, she had pulled the war into a place where no map could follow. And now, the great admirals of Earth, once full of certainty and strength, stood, staring into the mouth of a mystery none of them understood. Admiral Kovacs paced the bridge of the TNS Goliath, her steps slow and her face tight, listening to the quiet reports of engineers struggling to bring systems back online, watching wounded soldiers carried past without speaking, her thoughts locked on the strange rift that had swallowed the Queen, and the question that would not leave her mind: what was waiting on the other side? The answer came sooner than expected. From the edge of the nebula, a probe sent into the Queen's wormhole returned. Barely functioning, its memory corrupted by strange signals and organic residue fused into its metal. But buried deep inside its scrambled logs was a single, flickering image, A vast biomechanical world shaped like a sphere of flesh and crystal, surrounded by rings of light that pulsed like a living heartbeat. And orbiting it were ships, hundreds of them, sleeping, waiting. Kovacs studied the image in silence, then gave the order no one expected. "We go in?" The officers protested. The rift was unstable. The enemy had home advantage. They had just survived a near-death encounter, but the admiral did not flinch. "We follow. We end this." And so the fleet, reduced but still proud, prepared for what might be its last journey. And as the first ships approached the glowing rift, a chill passed through every crew. Lieutenant Miguel Rojas stood once more at the helm of the repaired, resolute, his hands shaking slightly as he watched the stars stretch and bend around them. The wormhole pulling their ship through with a sickening twist that made gravity feel like it was spinning sideways. And when the tunnel finally opened, what lay beyond stole his breath, an entire system hidden inside a spatial fold. A false universe curled into itself like a pearl, with the Queen's world at its center, surrounded by dark stars that did not move, in space that felt like it was watching back. The Goliath led the charge, pushing through with shields up and weapons primed, and immediately they were greeted by silence, no resistance, no attack, only the quiet hum of energy and the soft echoes of distant pulsing sounds like deep drums from another dimension. Kovacs ordered a scouting formation to fan out, and as the smaller ships moved forward, they began sending back strange data gravity readings that didn't match physics. Radio waves carrying voices in languages no one had ever spoken, and strange psychic murmurs that touched the minds of the crew. Not as words, but as dreams, fragments of memory that didn't belong to them. Miguel felt it too. He dreamed of fire that spoke and oceans that bled, and when he woke, he found a symbol burned into the inside of his cabin, while a perfect spiral, glowing faintly. Others reported similar marks. Cyan, still aboard the Goliath, grew increasingly disturbed, warning that the Queen's world wasn't just a base, it was a mind, alive and growing, and that they were inside it. But Kovacs refused to turn back. "If we stop now, it's all for nothing." The fleet pressed closer to the sphere world, and as they did, the sleeping ships began to wake. One by one, the Queen's vessels stirred from their orbit, their glowing eyes blinking open, their hulls shifting like skin stretching after sleep. And without a signal, they formed into a shield wall around the central world. No shots were fired. The Queen was waiting. Kovacs ordered a direct assault target, the outer ring. Test their response in within seconds. The Terran ships launched a focused barrage, cutting through the void with railgun fire and pulse torpedoes. But the Queen's vessels absorbed the damage like sponges, and then came alive with power, launching back waves of psychic energy so dense they bent time itself. Aboard the Resolute, Miguel saw the stars ripple like water and screamed as visions flooded his mind. Earth burning, his mother's voice calling his name. Then silence, sharp and cold. The human fleet broke formation, struggling to adapt to the alien tactics, but Kovacs kept them on course, sending in drones, adjusting frequencies, countering thought with machine fire. Yet for every move the humans made, the Queen anticipated. Two more. She was not reacting, she was controlling. And slowly, like a spider tightening its web, she pulled them closer. Then the Queen spoke again, her voice flooding every ship at once. "You enter my breath and wonder why you cannot breathe. You call yourselves the end of monsters, yet you become the storm." Kovacs answered aloud, not to speak with her, but for the sake of her people. "We came because you gave us no choice." But the Queen only replied, "You had 1,000. As the fleet approached the planet's orbit, the truth became clear. This was not her stronghold, was her birthplace, was the heart of the hive, a living cradle of intelligence and hunger, built not by hands, but by evolution itself. Aetherin begged Kovacs to stop, to study instead of destroy, warning that this place might contain knowledge the galaxy had never seen. But Kovacs could not hear it anymore. Her path was already set. Again, orbital bombardment. The ships fired everything: missiles, plasma, neutron warheads, and the surface of the hive world erupted in blue fire and strange light. But it did not burn. Instead, it grew. The impact zones pulsed with life, rebuilding instantly, and from those wounds came something new: not ships, not drones, but creatures the size of cruisers, grown from the planet's flesh, flying on wings of bone and light, and they charged into the Terran fleet with fury. The battle became chaos. Human ships broke formation, fighting for survival, each captain screaming orders, each crew pushed to their limit. Miguel's ship was hit hard, systems failing, fires breaking out, but still he held on, firing, dodging, surviving. In the madness, Kovacs saw an opening. The Queen's core, the central spire of her world, flashed with light, a moment of vulnerability, as she ordered all fire focused on that point. For one terrible second, every weapon turned and fired, a full barrage aimed at the heart, and it hit. The spire cracked. The Queen screamed. The entire fleet heard it, not in their ears. So loud, it shattered some minds, drove others to silence. And then, everything went still. The creatures stopped. The ships froze. Even the world paused its heartbeat. Kovacs stared at the screen, sweat pouring down her face. Had they won? Had they broken her? But before anyone could speak, the Queen's voice returned, quiet, not angry, not afraid. Now, you see? And the planet changed. Its surface folded inward, forming a gate of light and dark, and from it came a vision, not a weapon, but a memory projected across space, shown to every mind at once. A time long before humans walked upright, a galaxy ruled by predators far worse than the Kurak, the birth of the hive as a shield, a guardian species created to absorb war, to contain destruction. But something had gone wrong. They had adapted too well. The threat they were built to stop. And now, in humanity, the Queen saw the same path: destruction without understanding, war without end. Kovacs, shaken, whispered, "What are you?" And the Queen replied, "Your reflection." The gate closed. The Queen's world began to collapse inward, not in defeat, but as a choice. She was leaving. She had shown them what she needed to. And as her voice faded, the hive ships vanished one by one, folding back into the strange space from which they came. The Terran fleet floated alone. Silence returned. And in that silence, for the first time, humanity began to question not whether it had won, but what it had become in the fight. The wreckage of war drifted slowly through space like a funeral procession, broken ships casting long shadows across the stars, their twisted metal whispering silent stories of a battle that had nearly torn reality apart. And in the center of it all floated the battered Terran fleet, surrounded by silence so deep it felt alive. Admiral Kovacs stood on the cracked bridge of the TNS Goliath, her uniform torn, her eyes distant, watching sensor data scroll across broken screens while the last of the Queen's presence faded into the void. Her world folded into itself like a dream ending with the sunrise. No more hive signals, no more psychic voices, no movement from the creatures they had fought, only silence, endless and cold. Yet that silence brought no comfort. Survivors wandered the dim corridors of ships, half dead, whispering questions no one could answer. Engineers worked in near darkness, trying to bring life back to dying systems. On the Resolute, Lieutenant Miguel Rojas sat alone in the crew lounge, staring out a cracked window at the stars, haunted by the visions the Queen had shown him. The war before time, the monsters worse than any they had faced, and the truth that they had become something like them, not by design, but by choice. He touched the small spiral symbol still burned into the metal beside his seat, the last sign the Queen had left him, and wondered if it was a warning or a gift. Across the fleet, people began to talk not just about what had happened, but what would come next. No orders came from Earth Command. The wormhole had closed. Communications were unstable. Some believed the Queen had trapped them here. Others thought they had followed her too far and were now lost in folded space. But the stars still shone, and the ship's clocks still ticked, and so they moved, gathering what was left, salvaging parts from broken ships, transferring survivors to the Goliath, and the few cruisers still mobile. Kovacs held a briefing in the central war room, her voice low but clear, telling the remaining captains that they were not finished, that they had seen the face of the enemy, survived the impossible, and that now it was time to return to Earth, to truth, to themselves. But the room was heavy with questions. Was the Queen really gone? Had she retreated? Or had she planted something inside them? Listened from the back of the room, saying nothing, remembering how the Queen's voice had spoken directly into his mind, not just to frighten, but to challenge. And then came the first sign. A small drone, drifting in from deep space, its hull covered in strange new growths, half metal and half organic, pulsing faintly. They brought it aboard, studied it, and found a message not from the Queen, but from something else, something older. The message wasn't a threat. It was a map. A map to a place beyond the known edge of the galaxy, marked only by a single word, translated by the ship's AI origin. Kovacs stared at it in silence. Others wanted to ignore it, to head home, to rest. But the Admiral, weathered by war and haunted by questions, made her choice. "We go," she said. "We find out what this really was." And so, once more, the broken fleet moved forward, powered by determination and a sense of duty, not to destroy, but to understand. As they traveled, strange things continued. Crew members reporting dreams of worlds they had never seen, glimpses of vast machines, buried in planets, of stars that pulsed with unnatural rhythms. Miguel found himself waking at odd hours, walking the halls without knowing why. Sometimes standing before viewports for hours, listening for a voice that no longer spoke. He wasn't alone. Isirin, who had once begged for peace, now studied the Queen's last memories obsessively, trying to find the line between enemy and ally. She began to speak of balance, of cycles, of the way predators could become protectors. Some thought she was cracking. Others began to listen. Weeks passed, then months, as the fleet crawled toward the edge of reality, passing places where stars flickered wrong and time bent slightly at the edges, until at last they found it, the system hidden in the dark, a quiet sun orbiting a black sphere. Not a planet, not a station, but a structure larger than anything built by man or hive. They approached with caution. Scans showed no life, no energy. It was dead, yet it called to them. A single docking port opened without prompt. Kovacs, Miguel, and Azirin led the first team inside, moving slowly through vast halls of obsidian and silver, symbols etched into every surface, glowing faintly when touched. The air was cold, but breathable. There was no resistance, no traps, only silence and memory. In the central chamber, they found a device, a great ring surrounded by floating orbs, each one pulsing with a different rhythm, a map of life across the stars. As Cern touched the central orb, and the room came alive. A hologram appeared, flickering, vast, showing the history of a galaxy before the hive, before humans, before war. The hive had been created here by something no longer living, meant to contain a force that could not be destroyed, only absorbed. But the force had changed them. The hive became what they fought, until they forgot why they began. The final message, spoken in an ancient tongue, but clear in meaning, was simple. Only those who see their own shadow can stand in light. Kovacs stood in silence. Miguel felt something shift inside him, and not untying. They returned to the ship's change, not with power, but with understanding. The war was not over, but its meaning had shifted. They were not monsters. Not yet, but they had come close. And they had been given a choice. In the weeks that followed, the fleet began its long journey home, changed in more ways than one. The spiral symbol began to appear in odd places, drawn by crew who didn't remember doing it, appearing in frost patterns on windows, in the hum of engine tones. Some feared it, others called it a reminder, or distant, unaware waited for a report that would never truly explain what had happened. Because after the fire, what remained was not victory or defeat, but a deeper truth. Humanity had looked into the void, and the void had looked back, and from that moment on, nothing would be the same again.